Hello and welcome once again to Walking Down the Money Road. We've been very privileged to speak to Jay Spearing, David Lee and Andy Lonergan since debuting this podcast in April, and we're delighted to be joined today by a former Bolton captain who wore the armband for a large part of his final season at the club. Our latest guest made 94 appearances for Wanderers between 2012 and 2015, scoring 7 goals, and has since gone on to have spells at Nottingham Forest, Barnsley, Pune City, and has spent this season as a player coach at Forest Green Rovers. Our guest on episode 4 of Walking Down the Manny Road is Matt Mills. Hello Matt, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Very good intro there.
It's great to have you on the podcast. Okay, so for those people who haven't heard, there's a pandemic going around at the moment called COVID-19. Things have been difficult for everyone over the past couple of months. So what have you been doing to keep yourself busy?
Well, I've got 2 young children, firstly. So I think, as you can imagine, they're keeping me super busy, a bit of homeschooling. My wife's got me doing a lot around the house where I've obviously been away from home for all of my career, really. Football's obviously so demanding on your time. So in a strange way, it's kind of been nice to be based at home and to spend time with the kids and my wife. So no, been enjoying that, but also keeping my mind busy, speaking to my family. My dad's got a successful business, so I've kind of just been learning a bit about the family business as well. So just trying to keep busy and getting my daily exercise in, like I'm sure everybody else is enjoying that bit of freedom that they do get.
Okay, just as we were doing the research for this podcast, notice looking through the squad at Forest Green that you're currently playing the same squad as your brother. So in a bit of a strange way, you're seeing more of your family at the moment, but in another way, you're seeing a little bit less of your brother.
Yeah, no, it was planned. I think throughout our career, it was something that I always wanted to do. And then when I got the opportunity to go in a player coach role, it was great to obviously go back down south and spend time with my family. We created some really good memories this year on the pitch. So I'm really glad I did it. And it was, it's a kind of a nice way to kind of ease myself out of football.
It could have been a situation that cropped up a few years earlier. In doing, again, the research for this podcast, I noticed there was a little bit of speculation about your brother coming to Bolton at the time you were up here as well. So you got there in the end.
We tried to manufacture it for a few years, but we got there in the end. I think he'd have been a great signing for Bolton. He's had a fantastic year this year. I think he's our top goal scorer from left back, and he's captained the team. I think he's a type of player that's grown with age. I think some players kind of burst on the scene at a young age, and some mature, and I think he's developed his game really well, and he's become a leader as well. So no, I'm really proud of him. It was great to play alongside him this year.
All right, so we're still awaiting official confirmation at the time of this conversation, but it looks like League 2 is more than likely done for the season, with Forest Green finishing mid-table. If this is it for the season, how would you describe the campaign after what was such an impressive start?
I think if you look at Forest Green's budget and the attendance we get, it's a village team. So to kind of stay in the league, we're only new into the league the last couple of years. But I think obviously reaching the playoffs last year, there was high expectations, and obviously we were in the top 3, I think, for maybe 20 weeks of the season, something like that. We just had a really bad run after Christmas, and statistics of games were saying that we were completely dominant, and they come up with all these algorithms now of how likely it was, you would lose or draw a game. Simple fact of the matter is we couldn't put the ball in the back of the net, and that kind of pushed us away down into mid-table. I think if we would, like I said before, my brother was top goal scorer at left back with 7. If we'd have had a striker that maybe got 12, 15, for sure we would have stayed in the top three. I don't doubt that. I think defensively we probably had one of the best defensive records for long periods of the season. But yeah, we just didn't take enough chances, and that was our downfall, really.
Well, it looks as though Forest Green were definitely missing a man that's familiar to the Bolton fans as well. It was before your time down there, but Christian Doige last season, the whole situation of him being on loan at Bolton was going to be made into a permanent deal. Obviously, boardroom shenanigans at the time meant that didn't happen. He was sold to a club up in Scotland for around about half of what he was due to join Bolton for. So as much as some clubs you can point the finger at the owners, definitely not a case at Forest Green, because not the current setup at Bolton, but there's definitely a certain portion of blame to be attached to our lot a bit further up north as well. So we'll switch focus now to what's bringing the majority of listeners and viewers here, and that's your time at Bolton. So back in 2012, you were one of many arrivals at the Reebok Stadium as Owen Coyle looked to create a squad capable of achieving promotion. Can you give a little insight into how that move came about at the time?
I'd kind of fallen out of favour for one reason or another at Leicester, and I found myself back on the market, and spoke to very close to doing something with Celtic for about the fourth transfer window in a row, which was actually Neil Lennon, who's funny enough come to Bolton. But just felt like Bolton was the right move for me in terms of they just come down from the Premier League. I know they had big aspirations to go back up. It was northwest based, where I was comfortable in terms of my time at Manchester City. So I felt like it was the right move, but I quickly started to realise the situation wasn't quite going to play out how it was sold to me. But I think when I signed, I think the day after I signed, I think the club released 12 players, which was a bit of a shock. And then obviously after kind of the first season, the owners stepping away, and that's when you knew we were in trouble, really. And I think it's spiraled from there, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, we'll touch on that a little bit more later on. But you just say the day after you joined the club, 12 players were released. I think that's a natural thing after clubs do come down from the Premier League. Obviously, with the wage budget having to drop the way it is, we lost names such as Jussi Jääskeläinen, for example, that summer. Were there any players at the time, I know you might not have got to know them because you were new at the club, but were there any players who you were a little bit surprised that we let go after that drop from the Premier League?
I was surprised that many went. If I'm honest, I like I said, I didn't foresee that many going. That wasn't kind of portrayed to me when I signed. But yeah, okay, understandable. When the club gets relegated, it needs to obviously make sure the books are balanced. But you know, the players that we brought in, some loans. I think first season our squad was decent. We missed out on goal difference, didn't we, on the last day? So we were more than capable, really, of getting in the playoffs. I think that would have been a really good season. So yeah, really unfortunate with obviously the last day's result to miss out.
Okay, so we'll go into a little bit more detail about your first season now. So you played in 8 of the opening 11 games, and then there was a change after Owen Coyle was sacked in the October. So it only lasted a couple of months. But how would you describe the behind-the-scenes atmosphere during Coyle's time in charge?
Yeah, I think if you speak to anybody that's worked with Owen, he creates a really positive, buoyant atmosphere around the football club, and I enjoyed working with him. It wasn't for too long. Obviously, he was under pressure. I think when the club get relegated, the manager's always going to be under pressure to start really well. And then obviously they felt that a change was needed.
And you're seeing it a lot more with clubs coming down from the Premier League these days. I've spoken to a couple of other former players recently who joined similar sort of time to you. So obviously the priority, the goal was to get back to the Premier League. But initially we had that struggle. It wasn't until around February time that the form sort of picked up. We've seen Wolves at the time went down 2 years in a row. Blackburn have been down. Wigan have been down. Obviously ourselves, and we're keeping dropping even further. Huddersfield, Stoke, all right, they've not gone down twice yet, but they've not had a good time of it since they have dropped out of the top flight. So obviously you've not played too much at the very, very top, but what do you see as the big differences between the Premier League and why so many teams come down and struggle in the Championship?
I think mentality's got a big part to play with it. I think you find when players have played consistently in the Premier League, or they're seen as Premier League players, they struggle to adjust, because I think their mentality is, well, I'm a Premier League player. Why am I playing in the Championship? When in fact the reality is the top 5, maybe even 6 Championship teams could easily compete in the lower half of the Premier League. I think obviously the top Premier League boys are playing in a different league, but you look at the teams getting promoted out of the Championship now, most of them stay up. So I don't think there's a massive difference. I think the mentality, if you look at the teams that do well in the Championship, I think you've got a mixture of experience and youth and enthusiasm, and I think getting that balance right in the squad is crucial. Like I said, the first year we had a decent squad. We just fell a little bit short.
So after Coyle was gone, Dougie Freedman was next through the door, and to start with, you kept your place in the team. That was until a hamstring injury in a game I was at. A draw at Huddersfield Town in December 2012 put you out for a couple of months. In that time, Tim Ream had found form after a really difficult start to his time in England, and Craig Dawson was also brought in on loan from West Brom. You only played one more game that season, and that was as an 89th minute substitute in the April. So, injuries, new players coming in. Where did you stand on that? Are you able to explain what happened in the second half of that season?
Yeah, so the hamstring injury that you're alluding to was a really bad tear. I think that's probably the longest I've ever been out in my career. Even I've had a knee op, and I don't think I was out as long as that. So yeah, I was out for 2 or 3 months with that. So I guess not fit to be selected. Dawson came in, and Riemann, and they struck a really good partnership. And I think, like anything, when you come out of the team, you've got to respect if the team does well. It's going to be difficult to get back in. I can shed some light. It was made clear to me from Dougie Freedman once we go on to tell the rest of the story, and he re-signed me at Nottingham Forest, that it was pretty obvious that the club were looking to recoup money from wages, and they were targeting players that they wanted to put into a position where they could leave, I think, is the easiest way to say it. So my understanding is they needed to slash the wage bill come the end of the year. So I think they targeted certain players' wages that would add up to the amount that needed to be saved, and I guess I was on that list because the 2 guys were playing well, and you could argue why do they need me? So I kind of fell into that category as well.
It's a little bit funny how things turned out now you actually come to say that, because obviously Dawson being on loan, as much as the fans wanted him to stay, he had a real chance at being a Premier League regular, and as you see his career since then, that's proved to be the case. Dave Wheater at the time was struggling quite a lot with injuries. Tim Ream, as I alluded to before, he had a really difficult start to maybe his first 12 months or so in England. Once he moved over to left back, he was player of the year 2 years in a row. And the other name that I'm missing there is Zach Knight, who you mentioned one of the highest wages. As supporters, we're not open to that. But Zach Knight was brought in as a Premier League signing at the time. So you can understand there was cost cutting involved, naturally. But at the same time, when you were signed as a Championship player and there were Premier League players as such signed as Premier League players still at the club, makes you wonder just how many names were on that list that you were sort of mentioning there. So you just mentioned there was a little bit of a chance or speculation that you could have been moved on towards the end of that first year at Bolton. There was some quotes in the Bolton News around about that time. So this is the summer of 2013. Dougie Freedman was saying he wanted to keep you at the club, but wouldn't necessarily stand in your way if an acceptable offer came in. And the speculation at that particular time was Leeds. This was a Leeds team who were managed by Brian McDermott, your former boss at Reading. I saw the smile when I was reading out, wouldn't necessarily stand in your way if an acceptable offer came in. That is pure business talk. We'll keep you, but you can move on if you want to. Was there ever a point where you thought that was it for you at Bolton and you'd be going that summer?
Yeah, 100%. I came back the pre-season. It was made pretty clear to me that I wasn't wanted, and I could find a new club. So again, I've not got any. Listen, when you're in football, you develop a very thick skin, and it is what it is. So I started to put some feelers out in terms of leaving the club. Obviously, when I signed for Bolton. There were Premier League clubs and Celtic, and for whatever reason I came, but it didn't work out. So that's fine. I had to accept that. So I started to speak to other clubs. You mentioned Leeds there, who I've been linked with for quite a number of years. I think that the team, if I'm correct, won one game in 11 at the start of that season. I was going out on loan. Was I going out on loan or I was going out on a permanent? And then Dougie came to me and said, you can't go now. You're going to play the next game against Leeds. So that was after an international break. So I remember I was in Portugal at the time, and I came back and I think we drew with Leeds 1-1. And then I think we went on quite a good run, and then Dougie, me and Dougie's relationship kind of moved to another level where he was happy to have me around, and yeah, I guess we kind of just didn't really look back from there, really. Yeah, and the rest is history.
Well, I was actually going to ask you about that Leeds game at the time. It was actually a 1-0 defeat at home, that one. So,
all right, okay.
A little bit coincidence, a bit strange that you get yourself back into the team against another side that you've been heavily linked with. You mentioned yourself you had an extended run in the team from that point on, and that lasted through till February when a knee injury, presumably the one you mentioned before about the operation, a knee injury put you out again. After what had happened the year before with your hamstring, was there a sense that you'd find yourself struggling to force a way back into the team again?
Yeah, so no, that wasn't actually the knee injury that you're alluding to. But I did feel like I'd established myself. I'm not sure if he'd given me the captaincy then. Yes. I'm not sure if he'd given me the captaincy by then, but no, I felt like looking around the squad that when I was fit and I was in the right headspace, I would get back and play. So no, I didn't really have those fears as you mentioned.
Okay, so 2014-15, it was your ultimately final season at the club. Started very well on a personal note. You were back in the team after injury. You scored a couple of goals, and then wham, once again, another change in management. Freedman was out, Neil Lennon was in, who you'd mentioned earlier had tried to sign you previously as Celtic manager. Cracks had started to show at Bolton. Fans were losing interest. And you were one of a number of players that found themselves on the receiving end of some negative comments and chants from the stands. Is this something that you pick up on as players, or are you so focused once you're out on that pitch that it becomes water off a duck's back, so to speak?
No, it's tough, mate. It's really, really tough. Especially when, if you look at the period of time that you're talking about, those 2 years, we'd had 3 changes of managers. I'd have probably played, I'm guessing, nearly 50, 60 games by then. So that's 30 games a season, which is what you'd call established, I think. So a lot of players have come and gone. A few managers have come through the door. So to obviously hold the club, close to your heart and pour all your efforts and energies into doing well, it's just horrendous. The abuse you get is, it's not nice. So there's nobody that can in the game that can say, oh yeah, it doesn't faze you, because it does, because you care. So that wasn't nice, but I understood where it was coming from, and I felt the same pain, in the senses that I was sold on. I was signing for a big club with big ambition, and no disrespect, but the players that we were bringing in after year one, it wasn't really the level that you needed to go and get promoted. So I could see the frustration, obviously knowing what was happening kind of behind the scenes, and just trying to focus on giving your best, and ultimately, like, not letting the club drop down the league or try and have too bad of performances. It was a really, I'd probably say it was one of the toughest seasons in my career. There were good moments along the way, but yeah, no, it was a tough year.
So you mentioned briefly there, just 30, 35 appearances is what you classed as sort of establishing yourself on the side. I've just dragged your stats up now. The first season, obviously, there was a season-ending injury halfway through it, so you played 18 games that season. You played 35 in your second and 41 in your third. And all but 3 of those appearances were as a start as well. You only came on as a sub in 3 of those games. So I think you've got more than enough right there to say that you were established at the back. We won't dwell on this for too long, because I don't want to set the tone as too negative, but you mentioned there it's difficult dealing with some of the feedback from fans when things aren't going so well. Do you feel that you may have got a little bit more of that due to taking on the captaincy at any point, or do you think the mood at the time was so sour that could have been anybody out on that pitch?
No, I mean, reflecting back on my career now, over or coming to the end, conversations for the rest of my life, I'll be privileged to say that I captained Leicester and Bolton and Nottingham Forest and Reading. Like, I'm very fortunate, and I'm blessed, and I'm very grateful for that. But yeah, sure, things aren't going well. The captain for sure is going to be the first one to get it in the neck. So there's no point saying that you're prepared to take on the armband if you're not going to be able to take everything that comes with it. But having said that doesn't get over the fact that it was a really difficult time, personally. But listen, it is what it is. I would like a lot of fans to maybe appreciate what players go through, and I know, it's easy to say, oh, you're playing football for a living and you're really well paid, and just get on with it. Like, yeah, that's fine, but also I think that people need to understand that we are human beings. And I'm sure if for example we had a friendship and you saw that I was going through that, you would find that frustrating, because you know everything that goes in behind the scenes. But it is what it is. Is it going to change? No. I think culturally something's wrong, for me, in my opinion. Football fans should support the team, in good times and bad times. That's easier said than done, though. I understand that.
Okay, so as I said, we won't dwell on the negatives for too long. Do agree with you there that there is a bit of a culture change that does need to happen. How and when that happens is anybody's guess. So,
I'm quite an optimist, so I would like to think after coronavirus that humanity we are nicer. We are genuinely care about other people, because you see at the minute that what everybody's going through. I think people are really are pulling together and understand that at the end of the day, football or business or whatever industry you're in, we're all in the same boat.
all right. So you mentioned earlier on, as much as there were ups and downs at the time, there were some real highs, and I'm going to pick out two here. We had cup ties at Chelsea and Liverpool in your final season at the club. We should arguably have beaten Liverpool back on home soil in the FA Cup replay. As someone who spent the majority of his career just outside the Premier League, talk us through the atmosphere of grounds like Stamford Bridge and Anfield under those floodlights when you've got several thousand supporters, and it's switched to what we've just said, backing your every move. From someone that was at Anfield on that night, it's one of the best atmospheres personally that I've been a part of.
Yeah, I mean, and they're the snippets of football that just give you the biggest buzz. Yeah, Stamford Bridge. I made my debut there for Man City, so it was always one of my favourite grounds. So to score there was great, and I'll always have that memory. But yeah, Anfield was special, with quite a depleted squad at the time in terms of injuries, if I remember correctly. Yeah, the boys put in obviously a massive shift, and the whole back end of the ground was just packed out with Bolton fans. And I think with everything that we've gone through as a club for 2 or 3 years, I'm sure the fans thought that it was like the good old days. And yeah, it was a special evening, and one that would definitely last long in the memory of my career.
So Andy Lonergan spoke to us recently about the replay against Liverpool back at Bolton. It's a game that we somehow managed to lose despite being in the lead with 4 minutes to go. Lonergan suggested that Neil Lennon had ripped into a number of players after that game, and it coincided with a dismal run of form, which saw us slide down the league in the second half of that season. What was the mood like in the dressing room after that game against Liverpool? Because as a fan, you can accept losing to a team like Liverpool, but in the manner that we did it, doesn't make it any easier. It was crushing. As a fan, can't imagine what it must have been like to have been a player as well.
Yeah, I think your emotions are obviously always running high after a game, be it a win or a loss. But yeah, I think, if you look at it now, I think Coutinho was probably one of the world's best players at the time. The amount of concentration that goes into playing in those games is huge. Obviously, I played up front on the night, but the lads at the back had done really well, and it was just happened to switch off for half a second, and you're punished at that top level. I think the point that you mentioned about what Lonners is kind of referring to. Obviously, Neil Lennon's a winner. He's come from a winning environment where every week they win. It's a given. So I think there's a frustration in the fact that the reception from the fans was like exactly like you said. You can lose a game. It's not a great way to lose it, but everybody absolutely poured their hearts out in that game to try and get the result. So you can accept it, but as a manager, it's still a loss. It's still a loss, and you're a winner. So there's always going to be fallout afterwards. But I think for me personally, it didn't affect me. I know maybe it affected others. I just saw that it was the passion of what the manager was. And I guess I'd rather that than him come in and go, "Oh, brilliant lads, you did your best," because nobody really cares about that. They want to get results. So, yeah, we were unlucky, to be fair. We took them nearly all the way. And if we had beat them, I'm sure that would have been one of the biggest scalps that Bolton's taken.
But a lot of people may not remember, but he played the final 25, 30 minutes of that game with 10 men as well after Neil Dans had been sent off. So
yeah,
you mentioned that you found yourself up front for that game. So what was that like? So you've gone from defending against the likes of Raheem Sterling, Coutinho, many other big names, some of them are still at Liverpool to this day, to suddenly being at the other end of the pitch, somewhere they, other than maybe the last 5 or 10 minutes of games, you don't find yourself up there too often.
No, I think we played Rotherham the week before and I went up front for 15 minutes and set one up and scored one. So I guess that was probably in the gaffer's thinking at the time. But we only had like 13 fit first team players. I'm sure if you look at the bench that night, it was incredible what was on the bench. But this is what I'm trying to say to you in terms of when I got the stick off the fans. Bolton was my life for 3 years. If I'm asked to play up front, then I'm going to run around and do my best, be as productive as possible. If I'm asked to be a ball boy, I'll be a ball boy because you care about the club. You want the club to do well. So it was the morning of the game. The manager just called me. He alluded to my wife's father, Matt Elliott, who's a centre back with Neil Lennon at Leicester, that used to go up front a couple of times. So he said you'll be fine. Just put yourself about, be a handful. And I think I got the knockdown when Cloughie won the penalty, and obviously I'd have tucked it away. So it was good to play a part in the game. Just unfortunate we couldn't hold on really.
Okay, so just dragged up the team sheet from that night as well. Obviously yourself up front, we had Gudjohnsen, Zach Clough, who won the penalty, Gudjohnsen going on to score it. Liam Trotter came on for Zach Clough later in the game. And the bench also had a couple of the youngsters on there, George Iliev and Tom Walker. Iliev didn't go on to play for the first team other than the odd pre-season friendly, but Walker, I think it was the year after you'd left, managed about a dozen games, currently finds himself, I believe, League Two, possibly National League. So, yeah, as you suggest, kids coming through down to the bare bones. And I remember the game at Anfield as well when Heskey went off. It was young Connor Wilkinson that came on. No disrespect to Connor Wilkinson, but he's not going to challenge the Liverpool defenders. So we'll move on from the night at Anfield and back at the Reebok. A couple of weeks after that Liverpool defeat, you were sent off as we were beaten at Nottingham Forest. And you just mentioned yourself having to play up front. Well, after you got sent off at Forest, we had to then watch Emile Heskey take your place in defence.
Yeah.
You'd been strongly linked with Forest in the weeks leading up to that game. It was just after the transfer window had closed. Was there any suggestion at that time, obviously it's a few weeks before this game, but was there ever any suggestion that you would be off, knowing that in the summer, if you didn't sign a new contract, which we know in the end you didn't, and we'll move on to that, was there a suggestion you'd be off, knowing that 6 months later you were out the door for nothing anyway?
I think that the transfer window at Christmas, I think that's just speculation. I wasn't thinking about leaving Bolton in that window, or to be honest, ever. I was thinking I was going to go on to sign another contract. To be honest, the family was settled, etc. So that game was a couple of weeks after Liverpool. You mentioned Liam Trotter was the only recognised first team player on the bench. Going into that Nottingham Forest game, there's no way. I couldn't run. Basically, I couldn't run. I was in just the most ridiculous pain you could ever imagine. And because I am who I am, I wanted to try and play because we had nobody. We had nobody to play. So I basically couldn't move. Somebody went past me, taken them down, got sent off. So it wasn't surprising in terms of it, but it was a risk that we had to take because, okay, 10 men isn't ideal, but if I could have got through it, then I think it was worth the gamble. And I think fans really need to understand that there are things that go on behind the scenes. We're not fortunate enough at the time, especially to have a big squad where you can say, oh, you know, Matt Mills was set out because a fighting fit Team Ream can play. No, this wasn't the case. It was like, if you don't play, well, you're going to have to play an 18-year-old. So, yeah, I remember the game really well. Obviously, having been linked to Forest as well at the time, speculation or not, you're thinking, well, you always want to play well anyway. But it wouldn't have been a bad game to play well in. But yeah, no, I remember it very vivid. It was horrendous. I just remember hobbling around just in the most ridiculous pain. So yeah, I remember that game.
Well, it didn't put Forest off anyway, because later that summer you left Bolton at the end of your contract to move over to Nottingham Forest. There were mixed messages at the time, though. You mentioned just then that if offered a reasonable contract, you'd have been happy to sign. But later on also came talk of cost-cutting coming out of the club. So those final few months and the eventual departure, was there ever a realistic chance that you could have stayed on? Or were issues behind the scenes, obviously the financial problems that were coming out at the time and the 12 months following that, was that clear to you that it was time to go?
Yeah, so basically what happened was my agent was saying, you know, we need to look at other clubs and this and that. And I said, no, listen, I'm really happy at Bolton. You know, my family is settled. I've worked really hard to establish myself here, and you know, I want to stay. The club offered me a contract which was less than I was on, but that didn't overly bother me. I said, you know, yeah, that's fine. I think they offered me that, I think, about a month before the end of the season. So I was due to sign that. And then after the last game of the season, I remember Neil Lennon pulling me into his office and saying, I'll call you on Monday. And I said, I was going on holiday. And then that night they rescinded the offer, and no one from Bolton ever contacted me again. So I then found myself, you know, emotionally attached to the club and wanting to try and help, because I knew that the club needed as many players that were championship capable as possible, but also being kind of tough and scrappy, which is also fine. Like, you have to accept that, but it would have just been nice to be told that was the end, instead of kind of going into the market and looking for something.
And it's a real shame that I've spoken, again, we mentioned earlier, but I've spoken to a couple of other players who have had similar sort of time frames as yourself at the club, possibly even left a year later than you, when things really did start to bite in the boardroom. But the number of players that we're hearing from at the moment saying that have loved to have stayed on, they were offered less money, but it didn't really bother them. It just goes to show really how people were treated at the club at the time. And fortunately for yourself, you managed to probably avoid the worst of it with the ownership that came in afterwards.
Yeah.
Did you keep in touch with any players after you'd left Bolton that did end up going through that and just think, wow, I'm definitely made the right decision to get myself out?
Yeah, obviously spoke to players. I think we beat Bolton at the City Ground like 4-1, and yeah, you know, in terms of a football point of view for me, if you look at a football point of view for me, yeah, okay, I joined a more successful team that year, but it was really sad because that third year when I was getting stick and I knew that we just had to stay up, I was, you know, I could not get relegated with Bolton. I couldn't have that on my CV. And then to kind of the next season for them to go down, yeah, it was hard to watch. It was hard to watch.
Trust me, it wasn't as hard to watch as it was for us. That season after you gone was really, really difficult. So, again, let's not dwell on the negatives. So, we've mentioned Kyle and Lennon earlier, but I purposely left Dougie Freedman until now. He was the manager that signed you to a deal at Forest. So, was that just coincidence that you'd worked with him before, or was that previous working relationship the deciding factor? How would you sum him up? Because recently a number of others have spoken of him just being a little bit difficult or distant when it comes to working with him.
Yeah, so I guess my relationship with Dougie was strange, I guess. So yeah, it was clear when he came in that I think he was sold a different picture of what Bolton was going to be like in terms of the finances. Once he had to make cost cuts, I think he targeted a few players. If I'm being honest, I think he targeted a few players and he thought, right, your wages equate to what they've asked me to cut. So I'm going to put you with the reserves. You can leave and the club will be financially sound going into the year after. So that's what happened. So that's what happened. I came back pre-season. The first team didn't obviously do well. I think they won one game in 11. I trained, honestly, more than you've ever seen somebody train in their life. I would be the first in the morning. I'd be the last person to leave. I was doing double sessions. I was just desperate to succeed. Be that at Bolton, if I'm honest, to be that at Bolton or anywhere else. I didn't want my career to just plummet. The whole time Dougie saw what I was doing, and then when I came in against Leeds and kind of had a run in the team, he came up to me about 6 weeks after I'd been in the team, and he just said, "The way you've handled the situation," he said, "I've lesser people would have broken, thrown their toys out the pram." So he said, "Credit to you. You're a real man, and that's it." I stayed playing for him. I done well under him. I think when he went to Nottingham Forest, he identified that I could bring something to their squad that they didn't have. There was a trust element from both sides after a rocky start. I think I'd scored 7 up to Christmas in my first season at Forest. I was top goal scorer. I had a really successful period at Nottingham Forest under him because I liked the way he played in terms of he was very, very diligent and structured, and everybody had a role to do within the team. Some players struggle with that. More often than not, kind of flair type forward players struggle with that. But for me as a defender, it was perfect. It was black and white. You need to do this. So my relationship started bad, but ultimately, I've only got good things to say because he signed me for Nottingham Forest, and I think we worked well together.
And I think looking at Dougie's time at both clubs, it looks as though, and again, you mentioned it, it's probably given the old sales pitch before he got the job, realised it wasn't what it turned out to be. And I think maybe not quite on the same scale, but you could possibly say the same at Forest because they've had well-documented issues as well, which, as far as an outsider's point of view at the moment, fingers crossed they look to be over. We're starting to get to the end now, but let's bring it back to the present. We've got a couple more questions to ask. 33 years old now, 34 by the time next season finally arrives. You mentioned at the top of the show that you've been keeping yourself fit, obviously still as a professional footballer, but you've got interests outside of the game. What's next for you at the moment? Presumably you're going to stay in the game, still got a few years ahead of you. Are you likely to stay at Forest Green, or do you fancy yourself, like you say, at a bit of a higher division?
It's a very good question. Difficult for me to answer that at this time. I think that's a killer question. I guess the easiest way to answer it would be that I will take this time to make a decision if to play on or not. I've been lucky to have a good career till now. I enjoyed going to India after Forest. I think as much for like my mental health and to escape the pressure and of what England puts on you. Last year was great to do the player coach role, stay with my brother. Yeah, I don't know. Let's see.
Watch this space.
Yeah.
So before we do bring it to the end, we need a new name for this. We've called it Quickfire Q&A, but every time we've done it, it's been longer than any of the other questions on the podcast. So we'll see how it goes, and I'll keep thinking of new names. So 4 questions here. All your answers need to have something to do with your time at Bolton.
Yep.
So first one, I think I know the answer to this one. I keep saying that every time I ask this question to players. But best manager?
Yeah, Dougie.
Okay, is there any particular reason for that? You've joined in 2012. The players that I'm alluding to beforehand that I've spoken to, Jay Spearing and Andy Lonergan, they joined that same time as you. So they didn't get along with Owen Coyle. Realistically, it comes down to Freedman and Lennon. So you mentioned yourself, they're both good managers for your career. Difficult relationship with Dougie at the start, but turned it around. But why would you pick Freedman over Lennon personally?
Oh, for me, Dougie is tactically spot on in terms of. Yeah, I know that he got a bit of stick for the fans for not playing expansive football, but I'm a defender. I'm not too fussed about playing expansive football, and I make sure we stop the ball going in the back of it. So I like the structure and organisation.
All right, so on the field now, best player.
Just trying to think. I'll say Tim Ream is for his consistency as much as anything. I think he was rarely injured. Kind of always a 7 out of 10. So yeah, I'll say Tim.
He was rarely injured, but when he was, he played half a season with a face mask on.
Yeah.
2-time player of the year, back-to-back seasons as well. And Andy Lonergan in the previous podcast said he was the one that recommended him to Fulham as well. So we had to thank him for that. 2-time player of the year going on the cheap, as everybody was at the time. Not necessarily Bolton now, this one, but best opponent. Was there ever anybody that came up against you just thought, I'm in for a tough game today, or someone that always seemed to score?
Yeah, I mean, you could I could say Fernando Torres, Drogba, Benzema, Kaká, Ronaldo. Could say names, but I remember playing against Dean Windass, and I was only 18, and he absolutely I'm sure I broke my nose and 2 black eyes by the end of the game. He bullied me.
So up and down time at Bolton, with the ups being, from a fan's point of view, those games at Chelsea and Liverpool. But on a personal note, what's your favourite memory of your time at Bolton?
My first daughter being born, and I really felt connected to the club, and trying to bring her on the pitch on my last, turned out to be my last ever day. But yeah, that was special for me. Yeah, from a football point of view, there's loads, but yeah, let's go with
that. Before we do wrap it up, that's something that obviously at the end of the season we've grown accustomed to seeing the lap of honour, or whatever people want to call it these days. Is that something as players you genuinely want to do, or is it just something, we've got to go out and do a lap now? If things have ended on a high, then great. But as the last decade at Bolton has shown, if things aren't going quite so well, the stands can be empty anyway.
Yeah, which is sad, but I again, it's your football club. Players will come and go. I've felt throughout my career that from the moment I started pre-season to the last game of the season, I've absolutely lived and breathed every second for that football club. So you can argue if I played well or I didn't play well, I was 100% committed. So when I got to the end of the season, if it was I've lost in a Wembley final, I've been promoted, finished mid-table, and I've just stayed up, I've always felt like it was a mutual respect between players and fans to say, listen, we are where we are, good or bad. we gave you everything. And I think it's a nice thing to do.
I think you've got to give props to the Bolton fans as well, whether this is something you remember or not, because it's a few years after you left. But at the start of this season, we had a goalless draw at home to Coventry. It was the youngest team that Bolton had ever put out. At the end of that game, all the players did a lap of the pitch. Pretty much every single supporter was still in the stands, giving them a clap. We ended up losing 3 or 4 games on the bounce by 5-0. You still struggle to find a fan that will have anything bad to say about those lads, because you genuinely know they gave everything they had. So with that, brings an end to episode 4 of Walking Down the Manny Road. But before we do go, do you have a message for the Bolton fans who are watching or listening to this?
No, I think, well, just kind of what I'd like to think people would take in summary of this. Was I the best player to play for Bolton? No, of course not. Did I give absolutely everything for the football club? Yes, 100%. Obviously, you don't see all the hours that go in behind the scenes. So thank you very much for the memories. They'll live long in my mind and in my family's mind. And just thanks for the memories.
All right, and there you have it. So whether you're watching the first play live on Facebook, the replay on Burn the Naces on YouTube, or listening via Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts or Spotify, make sure to like, share and subscribe to be informed of future episodes of Walking Down the Manny Road as and when they drop. Previous episodes are available to stream on demand, but for now, thank you for joining us. He's been Matt Mills, I've been Chris Mann, and I'll see you next time.